All right. Hello, hello, hello. Happy Wednesday. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of continue on with Nietzsche here. And in particular, I've got a couple of supplemental materials. Also, it might be worth reading from your own book about Nietzsche. You can see my red water bottle back there. So as I indicated yesterday, Nietzsche is this kind of like big figure in philosophy, and he was, I mean, again, he was not very old and he was not very long-lived, but his influence still endures. So like I said, Nietzsche was born in 1844 in a small town in Germany, yet he despised Germany. There's too much beer in the German intellect, he would once claim. So he spent most of his adult life in Italy and Switzerland, where he became a citizen. He was trained in the classics and promised to be one of the most famous, best, brilliant philologists, which was kind of like a blending of psychology and philosophy. He's made a professor at the age of 25. It was during this time that he wrote virtually, oh, pardon me, bad health forced him to resign his professorship, and he spent the rest of his life suffering from a number of ailments. But it was during this time, too, that he virtually wrote all of his astonishingly cheerful and energetic works. In 1889, in the act of throwing his arms around the neck of a horse in order to spare its beating, he went insane. He died in 1900. So again, this kind of idea of Nietzsche having this really short-lived but yet powerful life. And ultimately, what Nietzsche is going to do, as I kind of mentioned yesterday, is that he is going to challenge us and encourage us to become more than who we are, right? And the question is like, how is that done, right? Like, what might that look like? What might that be like? And it's essentially to kind of like shed and throw off a lot of these hindrances where we think that life has to be a particular kind of way. And in particular, where when we think like life has to be a particular kind of way based off of what so many people have told us to do, how it is we should behave, how it is we should dress, the kind of people we should seek out to date, right? That we have all of these conceptions about all these things about what it means to live, right? Going back to our existentialist program. But ultimately, like, where and why are those the ideas that we think about, right? And so Nietzsche thought that if we could just kind of like unblock our mind, if we could unblock all of these constraints that like impose us and make us ultimately more weak, if we can kind of like throw off those constraints, then we can in fact become more alive. Okay? Pardon me here. All right. What is good, Nietzsche proclaims, is what is strongest, most alive, and creative. He's not so much an immoralist or an irrationalist as he is an enthusiast. His passion radiates from his writings, and it's his passion that he celebrates throughout them. Okay? On this ground, I made this mention yesterday. On the other hand, what Nietzsche despises most is weakness and impotence, and on this ground, he rejects the whole of Judeo-Christian morality and the moral emphasis on reason. Okay, and again, this isn't, I think Nietzsche. He was actually raised in a religious household. His dad was an active Lutheran. I believe it was a Lutheran. Uh, and so Nietzsche, I want to make clear here, isn't necessarily saying and just being flippant to be flippant here about religion, but what he's doing is saying that ultimately there are so many of these constraints, and religion might be one of the biggest constraints that reassures us that life is how it is, right? That it can only be what it is, and ultimately it can't be more than what we have right now. But Nietzsche thinks that again, that we can kind of shed and throw off all of those constraints. And this is where we get to and I'm moving quick here. I mean, it's kind of weird doing the video things. Usually I would pause, I would have discussion, I would see what you all think about kind of some of these claims that Nietzsche is making. But this is what we got. So now I want to move that kind of like echoes a little bit of how this kind of like works for Nietzsche. Okay, and in particular, Nietzsche introduces this concept that I don't think is going to be too difficult for us to understand, but it's a way of Nietzsche kind of conceiving of how the concepts of good and bad have manifest. Okay, Nietzsche again thinks that, Nietzsche thinks that again, kind of like good and bad are like human inventions, right? That they are, in fact, all too human inventions. That there's no objective God that has kind of given us understanding to know about good and bad, right and wrong, good and evil. Rather, they're very human inventions. And he focuses on this really interesting kind of concept that I don't think, again, is going to be too difficult to understand, but it's important to see how Nietzsche conceives of it. And it's this concept that Nietzsche calls, cleverly, the herd. Okay? And the herd is going to, I think, again, mirror some of the conversations that we had with Socrates, but it's going to be a bit different, and how it works is important here. Okay? So Nietzsche says, and this is from an old textbook that I used to use. It's also referenced in your textbook, but I've just got this one marked up so it's a little easier to follow. As long as humankind has ever existed, Nietzsche writes, there have been human herds, family alliances, communities, tribes, peoples, states, and churches. And always a great number who obey in proportion to a small number who command. Okay, so if you're taking notes as you watch these videos, this would certainly be something to kind of key in on. Nietzsche gives us the herd mentality, essentially, the herd, H-E-R-D, okay, like a herd of cows, a herd of sheep, okay, so the herd mentality. But then, how this works is there's a great number who obey in proportion to a small number who command. A great number who obey to a small number who command. And now Nietzsche makes this really interesting move where he focuses on the nature of obedience. Okay? And I'm going to pause this video because they're a little bit easier to upload when they're a little bit shorter. But I want to kind of like pause here for a second about this nature of obedience. Okay? So that's where we're going to pick up in the next video.